The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds is the sequel to my all-time favorite game, A Link to the Past. When it was announced on Nintendo Direct, I was thoroughly excited for it. How could I not be? The game that essentially shaped my childhood was getting a true blue sequel. And now that it's out, I can say that A Link Between Worlds is a quality game that doesn't quite surpass its predecessor. When A Link to the Past came out, it was revolutionary. The graphics were vibrant, the music was incredible, Hyrule and the Dark World provided huge expanses in which to explore and adventure. Several key elements of the Zelda series like the Master Sword, alternate dimensions, and a ton of new items were introduced, and the gameplay was flawlessly smooth and responsive. Looking at it with my rose-tinted glasses, I would still say it's a perfect game, but if I take them off, I can find a lot of things that were lacking. The structure is non-linear in a fairly bad way, and you could get lost far too easily. The bosses are thematically deficient, so they seem more like bosses for the sake of bosses instead of bosses that test everything you've learned up through that dungeon. And the story is fairly bare bones when compared to later Zelda games, causing your actions to feel unmotivated as the game rolls on. All of these things were fixed in Ocarina of Time, but Ocarina had its own fair share of problems, like too much hand-holding and overly straightforward boss battles. A Link Between Worlds succeeds as a game by being the best compromise of the two. The game plays mostly like A Link to the Past, with a few elements taken from Ocarina of Time. This is by far the game's strongest point. Playing the game just feels plain fun. Movement is a lot more fluid in this game than in A Link to the Past, due to the circle pad allowing a full 360 degrees of motion. Traversing the familiar landscapes is a lot more enjoyable by this, because you can navigate with precision in tight corridors as well as roam around in open areas with blatant disregard. Swinging your sword is repetitive and pleasant, and just like in A Link to the Past, you can quickly tap the B button to repeatedly swing your sword, which unexplainably feels so good. When the crux of a title's gameplay can elicit such a cathartic response from the player, it speaks well of everything else that the game has in store. One gameplay feature that is new to the Zelda series is that weapons no longer use ammunition. Instead, all items use varying amounts of your magic meter. This is easily one of the best new features of the game. Since your meter automatically regenerates over time, you never have to forage for extra arrows or bombs. You simply wait until your meter refills enough to use your items again. This eliminates much of the redundancy of Zelda. In the past, if a boss was to be defeated with arrows and you ran out of arrows, then the game would shoehorn in a way to replenish your ammunition, such as random pots and rocks lying around, or the boss itself spitting them out. With the new magic meter system in place, you don't have to forage, meaning your attention can always be on the task at hand and not on anything else. This system also allows for less item farming, meaning the things you actually do find by cutting down bushes are usually of some relevance or necessity, like hearts or rupees. This means the game has fewer boring elements and more outright enjoyment. A Link Between Worlds also does a lot to visually update the regions of A Link to the Past. Every single area of the game is graphically stunning and breathes new life into locations from 2 decades ago. The game takes all of the 2D sprites and backdrops and gives them better textures and depth. Being next to a cliff is more defined, and you can tell when you're standing above a chasm or above water instead of having to use context clues. Link's design is unique to both this game and A Link to the Past, being not quite the realistic look of Twilight Princess, but not completely cartoonish like Wind Waker. And the 3D effect is really good. It's neither overpowering nor too subtle. It's always the perfect amount of depth and really lends itself towards the purpose of enhancing the visual experience of the game itself. Canyons seem deeper, ledges feel higher, and everything looks really distinct when the 3D is on. Of course, you don't have to play with the 3D on, and you won't be missing out on anything in 2D, but the implementation of 3D functionality in this game is very efficient. The enhanced part of the game that stands out the most, however, is the music. Just listen to the difference. It sounds fantastic. Every single song in the game is either an amazing reorchestration or a wonderful new addition to the soundtrack. On top of that, the music changes dynamically as you progress through the game, most notably in the Hyrule and Lorule field themes. The overworld music shifts to more heroic and daring orchestrations as you get closer and closer to the game's climax. This helps amplify your sense of courageousness as you continue on your journey, as well as drive home the actual gravity behind everything that is occurring in the game's storyline. Through these means, the music of this game evokes just as much emotion as the music of its predecessor, which speaks volumes about the quality of the score itself. In addition to these upgrades, A Link Between Worlds does have its own unique features. One new feature introduced to help the game's pacing is item rentals. You acquire most of your inventory from Ravio, a new character who opens up an item shop in your house. You initially can only rent items, but later he allows you to buy them outright. Renting items is cheaper, but you'll lose rented items if you die, meaning you have to rent them all over again. Buying items is much more expensive, but you can keep your equipment if you ever fall in combat, meaning you won't have to pay to rent the item again after every single death. This new renting and buying system is both good and bad. It's good because it allows you to play the game however you want from an early point, but it's bad because it makes the game a bit too easy a bit too soon. A small gripe, but a real one nonetheless. The game also makes traversing the huge worlds much easier by having fast travel points. These points are placed in areas of importance and double as save points, which is actually an improvement upon both A Link to the Past and the entire Zelda series. The ability to choose where you will begin your next gameplay session is incredibly convenient and is another new feature that greatly lends itself to improving the game's pacing. Due to A Link Between Worlds' non-linear approach to the dungeons, these fast travel save points are a welcome addition, as they make navigating the world and picking and choosing dungeons less of a chore and more of an adventure. A small improvement, but a real one nonetheless. The main new feature of the game is the ability to merge into walls. This new feature adds plenty of new dimensions to both navigation and puzzles. Merging with walls meshes nearly seamlessly with all of the items and weapons in the game, and it feels natural to the experience. It's also the only way to travel between Hyrule and Lorule, the latter of which is this game's version of the Dark World. However, where the Dark World was a type of evil realm where bad things dwell, Lorule is not. It's an alternate world similar to Hyrule, but with a very important difference in its history that resulted in it being a dark and foreboding place. It's actually a very interesting region in its own right, and the contrast between Hyrule and Lorule is a constant motif throughout the game's entirety. The part of the game that seems very much like Ocarina of Time is the structure and application of the narrative. Where A Link to the Past had a very bare story, A Link Between Worlds does its best to motivate your every action, giving you many driving forces as the game rolls on. It establishes its theme much better than its predecessor, and thus you feel more heroic and accomplished for every boss that you defeat and every dungeon that you conquer. However, by finding inspiration in Ocarina of Time's structure, A Link Between Worlds falls victim to the same missteps. A very prominent problem is the game's lack of challenge. This is a picture of my endgame screen. Notice the bottom number? I died 0 times. None of the bosses are a big enough threat to defeat you, mainly because, like Ocarina of Time, the game presents them much too straightforwardly. As a result, you'll find yourself overcoming the opposition without much of a contest. Couple that with the ease presented by the item rental system, and you have a game that offers very little challenge throughout. Luckily, after you beat the game once, you unlock Hero Mode, which increases the damage you take and makes it much more difficult to replenish your hearts, so those looking for a real trial will be thoroughly pleased. The most important issue about the game is how much it struggles to establish itself as a unique entity. Yes, it improves a lot from A Link to the Past, yes, it uses a lot of good things from Ocarina of Time, yes, the game has its own features. But it stumbles through its presentation frequently because it never elaborates upon its original features. Whenever A Link Between Worlds has a chance to really expand upon its innovative mechanics, it instead chooses to retread the ground that has already been paved by the 2 hallmark games of its series. As a result, it grieves from the same failings as its forerunners. It references A Link to the Past too frequently to have an organic flow. It fails to improve upon the issues of Ocarina of Time. It's a game that cowers behind the successes of the games upon which it was based, hoping the player will never really think to question the quality and scope of the novelties that it brought to the table. In essence, it's a game that never really escapes the shadows of Ocarina of Time and A Link to the Past. A Link Between Worlds is a game that was 20 years in the making. It's a fantastic game that shows off everything Nintendo has learned in those 2 decades. The refined gameplay and amazingly recreated atmosphere is something that can only be found in a Zelda game, and Nintendo's trademark polish on the finished product is extremely evident. However, it lacks the same heart that prior games in the series have in spades, and thus it falls short of the greatness of those titles. It uses features of the original games as crutches instead of using them as tools, and the ensuing shallowness is noticeable in the final product. But in the end, it boils down to 2 questions. Is the game better than A Link to the Past? No. Is it still incredibly enjoyable despite that? Absolutely, yes. The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds is a game worth buying, and it gets a 93 out of 100. Hey guys, Asai, Nero, Tran here. I hope you guys liked that review. I tried a little bit something different because this is the sequel to my favorite game of all time. And I also had a lot more to say about the game than the 15 or so minutes that you guys just watched in the review. If you click on the annotation that's on screen right now, it's the little thumbnail. I actually have an extended thoughts for the game itself. So go ahead and check that out if you want to hear me just kind of talk for, I don't know, like however long the video is. 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Maybe an hour. No, I'm just kidding. I won't talk for an hour about the game. We'll be there forever, and I'll start repeating myself like it's stupid. And if you like Zelda, then I got other Zelda stuff coming up soon. You can follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook, like the video if you liked it, like it if you don't. Subscribe. Hey guys, A Link Between Worlds here. I was just trying out Asai, Nero, Tran because it's the sequel to my favorite game of all time, but